Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now this morning, is it really wise to wind down our COVID infrastructure? Did the government lose in court over COVID contracts, or is it a little bit more complicated? Will Jeremy Corbyn be deselected? And we'll talk through those latest house price figures out any minute now. So all that after your morning headlines.
A very good morning to you. It is 9:31. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date today on GB News. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is warning there's no evidence of military de-escalation by Russia at its border with Ukraine. He says 60% of Russia's entire land combat power is stationed there, and that there's a continuing build-up of field hospitals and strategic weapons systems. NATO defence ministers are meeting in Brussels today to discuss the ongoing crisis. Prince Andrew is facing renewed calls to give up one of his last remaining major titles, Duke of York, after agreeing to settle the civil sex assault claim brought against him by Virginia Giuffre. The royal has already been stripped of his honorary military roles and his Royal Highness title. Prince Andrew says he regrets his association with the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein and has agreed to make a substantial donation to Miss Giuffre's charity. The cost of living has increased further, with inflation rising by 5.5% in the 12 months to January 2022. That reaches a near 30-year high. Higher prices in clothing, rising costs of some household goods and increases in rents were key factors behind the rise. Drinking 2 medium glasses of wine a day can take adults over their daily recommended sugar intake. The Alcohol Health Alliance UK looked at the calorific and sugar content of 30 bottles of red, white, rosé, fruit and sparkling alcohol sold in the UK. Well, they found that 2 glasses a day could have more calories in it than a hamburger. They're calling for better labelling. You're now up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Now let's head to Tom for the briefing.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on both your TV and your radio. Now, Boris Johnson confirmed to the House of Commons last week that the last of the COVID restrictions are likely to be lifted by the end of this month. But 75% of the British public want restrictions to continue, opinion polls suggest. The backlash, in political terms, is already afoot, with Scottish Health Minister Humza Yousaf accusing the Prime Minister of lifting restrictions for, quote, his own selfish gain, as opposed to considering the public health advice. But is that really true? Is now the right time for Boris to lift restrictions epidemiologically or politically? And what about the associated infrastructure, from free testing to ONS surveillance? Well, let's talk through all of this now with Tom Whipple, the science editor at The Times. Welcome to the programme. I suppose for many people, we might be raising an eyebrow looking at a weakened Prime Minister, seeing the position in which he sits and thinking, is this really the scientific thing to do?
Yeah, and look, that's perfectly reasonable, and I can't see a window into Boris Johnson's soul, and he might well have other reasons to do it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the wrong thing to do. And the truth is, we've reached the stage in the epidemic now where this is a political decision, and where there isn't clear scientific unanimity about what needs to be done. I guess the crucial thing is, we are talking about whether it's the right time now, rather than whether it's the right thing to do. I mean, we know that these have to go at some point. So if people are saying it shouldn't happen now, which there are reasons to say that, then they have to say why and when the data would be such that they would say, actually, look, this is time to stop treating this as an exceptional virus and just treating it as one of the viruses we have.
It's interesting looking at the data. The Prime Minister pointed in the Commons last week to positive data, and it does look positive. Deaths are declining. Deaths for this time of year are actually lower now than on average and have been for the last few weeks. I wonder, though, if we remove, for example, the mandatory self-isolation requirement, might those numbers begin to tick up again?
That's a really good question and key. And the first thing is, do we care if the numbers tick up? Or are we just postponing infections that are going to happen anyway? Is the purpose of non-pharmaceutical interventions to prevent surges rather than to prevent infections? But the second sort of less theoretical argument is, would people stop self-isolating? One of the things that we found throughout this pandemic is actually people continue to do things voluntarily even after the restrictions have gone. That's why we probably didn't see the surges that were expected last summer. And I suspect we're not going to be in the situation where people have terrible COVID but are saying to their bosses, look at me, aren't I the best worker? Here I am sneezing all over you in the office. I suspect they'll still be staying at home. Where we might see a difference is asymptomatic children will, no longer be staying at home when they could be at school. So I wouldn't expect a step change. Obviously, there will be more infections because of this, but I wouldn't expect some massive step change in infections as a result.
Now, there are 2 points that people are pointing to with regard to the infrastructure around COVID that has rather impressively been built up in this country, probably more so than many other places in the world over the last 2 years. The mass sending out of these free lateral flow tests. At the last count I saw, it was costing around £9 billion a year to send out these quote-unquote free tests to everyone to do rapidly. Obviously, a lot of pressure from the Treasury to stop sending those out, and that's probably going to be the right thing to do. We can't spend £9 billion every single year on this stuff. But on the other hand, we've got this surveillance system from the ONS. They test the sewers, they randomly swab people in houses to get a representative sample of what's going on. Is that wise to wind down?
I would think probably not. I suspect that it's highly possible it won't be wound down. We don't know yet. It's been a marvel, and it's been something that no other country actually has done in this way. And it's such an obvious thing to do. You can't have a self-selecting sample to try to understand what's going in the country. You kind of need an opinion poll of COVID. And that's what the ONS survey has been. And it's a great way of getting really granular surveillance of what's going on in the country as a whole. Obviously, it too has to wind down eventually or move to something smaller. But at the moment, it feels like it should be the last thing to go rather than the thing that goes with everything else. The one thing I'd say about the testing regime is and we might well get plans for this. There are a few reasons. One of the key reasons why COVID isn't so much of a worry going forward is because we have antiviral drugs. If we want to apply antiviral drugs, we need to be catching the most vulnerable people very early in their infection. And there needs to be a plan within the testing regime to make sure that they're still being tested early enough. Otherwise, that part of it will be a false economy. The second thing that people want to see is a plan for the immunocompromised. Most immunocompromised people accept that the country has to return back to normal, but they remain at risk. And what they would like to know is, can we get the prophylactic drugs that we know are coming onto the market, things like antibody treatments, and can we find a way so that we can still go about our lives whilst everyone else is back to normal? And I think they're feeling that they've been once again a sort of afterthought in this.
It's interesting, that point about those tests, because I know that, for example, Paxlovid and some of the other, what are we calling them, therapeutics that are needed, you really do need to catch them very, very early. That's going to be a really interesting line to walk. I wonder, just finally in this conversation, it looks like England will be the first country in the world to do this wholesale. In your view, will other countries follow in short order?
I suspect so. I mean, they have so far. I guess they'll watch us first and see, see what happens. But Wales and Scotland certainly have been more cautious than England. But the truth is, if it works, if there isn't a massive spike, they all know this is the end point that they have to end up to as well. But of course, one slight caution is we could have been having this conversation perfectly reasonably in October of last year, and it would have been correct then. And another reason why we need to keep up surveillance is then Omicron emerged. I think you can say that we're winding down our epidemic here, but we are always at risk of some new import that will mean that we have to an extent, go back a few paces.
What a positive note to end this conversation on, the chance of another new variant. Oh gosh, I despair. But Tom Whipple, science editor at The Times, thank you for joining us this morning on The Briefing. Really interesting conversation there. Now, yesterday, it was widely reported that the High Court ruled that former Health Secretary Matt Hancock broke technical equality rules when he appointed Dido Harding to a senior role in the government's pandemic response. Now, think tank the Runnymede Trust won one claim against the government that the recruitment had been conducted without sufficient, quote, open competition in the middle of the pandemic. But the reports missed off a significant part of this story. The Runnymede Trust's portion of the case was one small technical one. In reality, the vast bulk of this case failed. The part brought forward by the celebrity lawyer Jolyon Morn, someone who's perhaps best known by the public for killing a fox with a baseball bat in his garden on Boxing Day 2019, all while wearing his wife's kimono. Now, here's what the judgment said. The collective effect of the conclusions set out during this judgment is that the claim brought forward by the Good Law Project, that's Jolyon Morn's project, fails in its entirety. Now, the claim by the Runnymede Trust fails on grounds 1 and 3, but succeeds on ground 2 only in 2 cases, appointing the interim chair of the National Institute for Health Protection and the director of testing as well. So small technical wins there. But in large part, this case failed. But the media didn't really report that particularly widely. However, one journalist who did was Christian Calgi, the senior reporter at the Guido Fawkes website, who I'm delighted to say can join us now. Christian, first of all, Jolyon Morn, the celebrity lawyer who brought forward the bulk of this case, lost. And yet it's been spun as some kind of win. What went on?
Well, I think the problem is that Jolyon is becoming ever more proactive in spinning his claimed victories, because we've spent the best part of the last 5 years pointing out how often this guy loses. And of course, that isn't very good for raising donations. The reality is that the Runnymede Trust, which is a sort of pressure group that deals with equalities issues, brought this case against the appointment of Dido Harding on equalities grounds. And what Jolyon Morn did with the Good Law Project was they sort of latched on to the case as a whole with an additional argument that the appointment was cronyism, that she was only appointed because she was mates with Matt Hancock. And in fact, the reason that the court said the case failed in its entirety was because there was no evidence whatsoever to support this allegation of cronyism being the thing that got Dido Harding the job.
This is a really, really important distinction here, is it not? Because when people hear those reports, and other broadcasters were gleefully singing these reports yesterday, saying that, the equalities failed in this, and sort of all these people were appointed without due process. But actually, this wasn't cronyism at all. The High Court specifically said it wasn't cronyism in terms. And I wonder, going one step further, if we should really expect there to be the normal process for putting out to tender, if you want, the recruitment process, to go through every single stage, that laborious, normal recruitment process, in the middle of a global pandemic. Is that really reasonable?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, most people, if they dug into the detail on this, would think it was pretty reasonable to expect. I think it was April 2020, the Department of Health wanted to expedite appointment processes on fighting the pandemic as quickly as possible. And actually, the judgment was pretty fair-minded in that. In fact, as you said, the Runnymede Trust actually brought 3 arguments against the appointment process. Only one of them, Case B, was found in favour of, and that was about the process behind the recruitment rather than the recruitments themselves. So, there's no issue here. Dido Harding is not, going to be engulfed in scandal. And actually, I think most people whose lives were saved by decisions by the Department of Health in terms of a vaccine rollout are not going to be quite that upset that, for example, the Department of Health, Matt Hancock, didn't take into account ethnic minorities or disability candidates as much as they perhaps should have. But there's also, I think, a wider problem here for Jolly and Morn and the Good Law Project, because one interesting aspect of the ruling was that the judge, in effect, said that the Good Law Project cannot have skin in the game on all these issues, which groups are supposed to when bringing a judicial review. And it sort of really damaged the credibility of the organisation as a whole. And I think increasingly going forwards, the Good Law Project is going to be finding it more and more difficult to bring these time-wasting, public money-wasting cases against the government. Because they're just sort of busybodying, and they're not really that important to the organisation itself.
It is fascinating. I do wonder who it's supposed to help, relitigating all of this stuff, that in the middle of a pandemic, not enough ethnic minority or disabled candidates were considered. I mean, Dido Harding was a CEO of a major corporation. I think it's probably a problem that some of our major corporations, not many of them are led by ethnic minority or disabled people, but I suppose that makes it harder to recruit them. And in the middle of a pandemic, trying to do all of that seems a little bit of a stretch. Well, for now, Christian Cowgie, senior reporter at Guido Fawkes, thanks for talking us through that important story and important corrective to what was going on elsewhere in the media. Now, recent reports suggest that the Labour Party is preparing to deselect former leader Jeremy Corbyn from his Islington North seat, the seat that he's held for nearly 40 years, since 1983. Now, Corbyn, of course, has sat as an independent since October 2020, when he had the whip removed after stating that anti-Semitism within the Labour Party had been overstated for political reasons. Now, Labour has since refused to restore the whip without an apology from Mr Corbyn. But developments this weekend suggest that an apology will not be enough any longer, that Mr Corbyn may be deselected anyway. Well, let's talk through this now with former MP for Ealing North, Stephen Pound. Welcome to the programme, Stephen. First of all, is it really realistic that Jeremy Corbyn, a man who's undoubtedly popular in the seat of Islington North, if not so the wider country, someone who's won that seat for election after election, is it really wise for the Labour Party to cast him out?
Well, the Labour Party isn't going to deselect him. As long as he's an independent MP, and to be honest, I've known Jeremy for nearly 50 years. He's always been an independent MP. If he stands as an independent, then so be it. That's up to him. The Labour Party isn't going to deselect him, but you can't stand as a Labour candidate if you're not a member of the Labour Party. But look, the whole thing about Jeremy Corbyn, it's not about him as an individual. He'd be the first person to say this. This is about a sort of recasting of the ruins within the Labour Party. Whatever you say about modern politics, it is now a sort of a retail pick and mix politics. The old idea that about 45% voted for one party, 45% for the other, and 10% threw their votes away on the Liberals. I mean, those days are long, long gone. Nowadays, if we had proportional representation in this country, we'd probably have 35 to 40 different representatives within Parliament. But we're not. We've got first past the post. Independents don't win anything. Therefore, what this is really about is not about Corbyn. It's about the far left on the Labour Party, the far right on the Labour Party. We've kind of muddled along together as uneasy bedfellows for really far too long. And I think however you look at it, the Labour Party, we're doing very well in the polls at the moment, but I would actually say, in fact, the Tories are doing very badly in the polls. There's going to be a recasting of the way that we do politics in this country. And I think whatever you say about it, a lot of Liberals are saying to us, why on earth are we fighting against Labour? And a lot of Labour people are saying the same the other way around. I think Jeremy Corbyn is emblematic. He's symptomatic of a particular issue. And as far as Jeremy is concerned, God love him, and I've known him long enough, he's the same age as me. I retired from Parliament when I was 72 years old. Jeremy, he's earned his corn, he's done his work. He's 74 years old at the next election. Leave, retire with the laurels of a grateful constituency pressed to his brow.
I wonder if Keir Starmer's about to enter the same trap that Tony Blair famously did in the first London mayoral election. Sort of cast out Ken Livingstone. Ken Livingstone stands as an independent and actually is able to win. Could Jeremy Corbyn not win in Islington North? He's got many councillors on his side. He's got a big personal following, probably a national campaign with the help of Momentum or something like that. Might this be a bit of a shot in the foot for Labour?
It's a couple of interesting points you make there. I mean, I wept for poor old Frank Dobson when Frank Dobson was given the hospital pass to stand in London against Ken. There's a slightly different situation, I would suggest. Look, the brute reality of British politics is that independents don't win. Ken broke that mould. He did it once. I don't think he could ever do it again, and I don't think we'll see that again. If Jeremy stood as an independent, he wouldn't win in Islington. He knows that. We all know that. However, if militant Momentum, whatever the far left are calling themselves nowadays, if they did coalesce around perhaps with union backing, and let's face it, we've got a vote with ASLEF in May about possible disaffiliation. We've got the situation with Sharon Graham and Unite, getting involved in the Coventry bin workers' strike. It's possible, it's entirely possible, it's not probable, it's possible that we could actually have a new party of the left emerge, of which Jeremy would be a shining, glittering light. No question about that. However, I think it would soon be off the highway to hope and into the lay-by of lost dreams very, very quickly, because it ain't going to succeed. But you're right to put the point. You're quite good at making uncomfortable points, and I sometimes wriggle when you make them. But this isn't comparable to Frank Dobson and Ken Livingstone.
It's interesting, a new political party. I'm sure there are many on the Labour left who would say, no, stay and fight, in the way that those in your position, many of them in the last few years were saying stay and fight when people were going off to Change UK and the like. I wonder if we're seeing a mirroring of history there. It's an interesting one. But Stephen Pound, thank you so much for coming on and discussing that issue through. I'm sure it's one that's going to run for a little time yet. Now, getting on the property ladder seems to be getting more and more difficult. UK average house prices increased by 11.8% over the year to September 2021. And as UK inflation has hit a 30-year high of 5.5%, the cost of living squeeze continues to tighten. So this new house price figures, the house price index released just minutes ago, show that these trends are very likely to continue. House prices increased by more than 10% over the year to December 2021. Double-digit increases. People aren't getting double-digit increases in their wages. Now, the average house price in December was £275,000 in December, a £27,000 increase from the same time a year before. £27,000 the average house earned. That's more than the average person. Well, let's talk through this now with Freddie Poser from Priced Out UK. Welcome to the programme. That's an extraordinary figure, but entirely unexpected. I should have said expected.
Absolutely. We knew that this was coming. Unfortunately, house prices have been continuing to skyrocket for years now, and the government isn't doing nearly enough to sort that out. So it means that more young people are going to be priced out of the market will remain completely inefficient, and it won't work for the average Briton.
When we're looking at what the government is doing, which in fairness is nothing, what should they be doing? Of course, successive governments over the last few decades have tried to reform the planning system, and yet they've been beaten down by vested interests time and time again. Is it simply impossible to fix supply?
Weirdly enough, for such a sort of major crisis, the solution is really simple. I know that we agree on this one, Tom. You know, we need to build more houses. We haven't built enough houses for at least 3 decades. We know we need to build more houses, and we know we need to build them where the demand is. We need to build them in our major cities. We need to build them in London, near to transport. As you say, though, you know, we've structured our economy such that the vested interests have so much desire, such a high desire to keep these prices high, to keep new houses from being built, that even, you know, a Conservative government with an 80-seat majority has not been able to pass pretty mild planning reform that they proposed this time last year.
I suppose this is the problem, Freddie, isn't it? £27,000 increase in the price of houses. For people like you and me who don't own houses, that sounds horrific. But for people who've just bought a house or who own houses, that sounds tremendous. They've just got £27,000 richer over the last year.
Well, I'd caution that they haven't actually got richer in practice. You know, if every house is getting more expensive, the more expensive house is going to get more expensive even quicker, which means that you're not going to be able to expand your house. If you want to grow your family, for example, you're going to find it more difficult to move up the property ladder. Remember, it's not just about getting on that first rung. This is a market that fails for everyone. It's most acute for those of us without a property of our own. But realistically, this impacts every single person in the country. It makes us all poorer, and it hamstrings our economy.
So in the final 30 seconds of this programme, what should be done?
Well, the thing I'm most excited about at the moment is a concept called street votes. It's in Michael Gove's white paper for the Levelling Up bill, and it's got a real chance to bring both sides together. The YIMBYs, who really want to expand houses in the right place, and the NIMBYs, who would actually be able to benefit from even other people building new houses. So I'm really excited that could be a sort of middle ground solution that could make it.
Well, Freddie Poser, you've hit your 30 seconds perfectly. Thank you so much for coming on the briefing this morning. That's Freddie Poser from Priced Out UK. Brilliant. So that's the programme today. Coming up, it's To The Point with Patrick Christie's and Mercy Maroki. But first, here's the weather.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin. A windy Wednesday for all, but for some, a potential for damaging gust of wind later. We have an amber warning in place as Storm Dudley moves in, an amber warning for parts of southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. An area of low pressure currently bringing wet and windy weather. That's clearing away, but it's as this arrives later on. That is Storm Dudley. Those isobars pinch together and the winds get very strong this afternoon and this evening across parts of the north. For many, it's a fine, bright start out there, but it is blustery. Some sunny spells continuing across eastern areas. But here comes the rain into Northern Ireland. Heavy rain, too, for southern Scotland and northern England this afternoon, along with North Wales. Further south, many places staying dry, but the winds just continuing to strengthen through the day. But Storm Dudley is bringing mild air, so temperatures out there double-digit.